Okay, direction fields is a lot more straightforward than the last lesson. And it's actually not crazy difficult, and a lot of times it's on the free response portion of the AP test. So it's like an easy few points to pick up. For the most part, people get it. You just have to be careful that you do it right, because sometimes people fly through it and do something wrong. Um, Here we go. So direction field for the differential equation is shown. Sketch the graphs of the solutions that satisfy the initial conditions. So all you're doing is you're identifying what the point is here. So this point would be 0, comma 2. And then you're going to plot that on your graph. And then you are going to draw a curve that follows this direction field. So what this direction field shows you is what the slope is. So do you see how when x is 0, the slope is changing depending on what your y value is? So when it's at this particular spot here, isn't the slope approximately like that? Okay, so your graph should have a slope like that. As I move to the right, what's happening to the slope? It's kind of going like this, right? You want to follow what the slope is. As you go further to the right, it's actually tilting up now, so follow that slope. And then as you continue to the right, it's going even more, right? You want to follow those slopes, and then it'd probably go something like that. Does that make sense? So you're kind of following it like it's a stream that's, carrying you through it here. So the other side, same idea. It's really steep here. So I would say it looks kind of like a parabola, which it probably is. Okay, so second one, you're just starting at a different point, but you're doing the same thing. So 0, -1 has a positive slope to start with. It looks like about a slope of 1. And then it gets steeper here. So I'm thinking it looks something like that. Same idea on that side. So go ahead and try the last one, and then we'll compare them. And really the green one might even be a little steeper on the right-hand side when I'm stepping back and looking at it. But gives you a pretty good idea. So I'm getting something that looks about like that. Is that what you guys got? Okay, it's okay if it's a little bit off. Any questions on how to do that? So if the direction field, sometimes it's called the direction field, and sometimes it's called a slope field. So if you hear something about a slope field, obviously it's going to look like this, so you might just figure it out. But they're really the same thing. It's what direction it's going or what the slope is at those points, okay? Ready for the next page? Okay, so it's easy when it's given to you. Here we have to draw a direction field or a slope field for each of the following differential equations. Each tick mark is 1 unit. This is what it's going to look like on the AP test. Okay, they give you an equation like this, dy dx equals whatever, and then they give you typically 9 or 12 dots that you have to draw the slope field for. So it's not like you're having to draw 100 of them, because that would require way too much time. On your homework, there's quite a few if you look at it here. We got 35 here instead of 9 or 12, but it's good practice. So okay, so what I would do first is we are going to identify what the x and y are at like each of these dots. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put x, y, and then dy dx. I'm just going to make a little table here. And I would just keep one of them the same. So let's say we're just going to deal when x is 0. So we can use 0, 0 for a point. another point, so that would be this point here, 0, 1 would be another point that we can do. 0, 2, right? And then couldn't you do 0, -1, and 0, -2? And that takes care of all of those x's, right? Then your next group is going to be when x is, 1, and then 2, and then 3. You guys see what you're doing there? So there should be 5 of these, and you don't end up missing one. And once you get going with them, some of them kind of have a pattern going, some don't. We're just going to write them like that so they're in order, and you'd continue on, right? So everyone ready to see what we do with these? So to find dy dx here, we're going to take the x value and add 1. So does it even matter what the y value is? No. So if I take the x value and I add 1, what's the dy dx always going to be for these spots? 1. So if the slope is 1, at all 5 of these spots, you're going to have a slope that's 1. So it should look like it's pointing to this point and this point here. And typically on the AP test, the slope's 1, 0, -1. Sometimes it's a half or 2. So then your slope would obviously increase or decrease a little. That's not always going to happen in like a homework problem, but they want to be able to see that your slopes are pretty accurate. Obviously that one's a little bit off. Okay, so all those slopes should look like a slope of 1. All of these should look like a slope of what? 2. So if it's a slope of 2, this one you'd go up 2 over 1, so it should point at this point here. And then all of them should have that same slope there. And typically I like to have things super accurate, so I get, like a ruler and do all that. Like, don't. Okay, it's okay if it's not crazy accurate. Just make sure when you're doing it on the AP test and it's a slope of 1, it looks like this is pointing at that spot. Be really careful of that because you won't have a ruler and stuff on your AP test, so you need to practice it. So all of these spots are going to look like a slope of what? 3. So then we're going down 3 to the left one, pointing at that one. So it should be steeper than the last set there. And the last one should have a slope of 4, so even more steep. If x is -1, what am I going to have a slope of? 0, right? -1 plus 1. So then I get 0 for my slope. So all of these should go across. You guys see how to finish that one out? So -2, it's going to have a slope of -1. And the slope of -2, so steeper over here. Questions on that? So it's a lot easier when this is only in terms of either x or y and doesn't have both. It's a little bit harder when it's in terms of both because then you actually have to calculate it for each of the spots. So let's set up our x, y, and dy dx. And I'm just going to start when x is 0 again. And find dy dx, you just take and you add the x and the y together. So if I add the x and y together, I get -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2. And then you have to plot those at each of those points. So at 0, 0, the slope should be 0. At 0, 1, the slope should be 1. Everyone following this? At 0, 2, the slope is 2. Go backwards or go down here, and we got a slope of -1 and a slope of -2. questions on that at all? Okay, so I'll set up the ones here and you guys can just compare. I'll let you kind of work through it. Do you see how this is kind of easy? Do you see how it's easy to make a mistake though? That's why it's nice that on the AP test they kind of restrict it to 9 of them or 12 of them, so you're not trying to rush through it, you know? You can actually make sure you get those 9 or 12 correct before you move to the second part. So typically this is like one of the free response questions. Part A, you get probably 3-ish points for doing your slopes correctly is what it typically is. And then part B, we haven't done that concept yet, but part B almost always follows these, so then it's easy to pick up those points too when we get to that stuff. We'll talk about that a little bit more. So does anyone need further guidance on this, or do we feel good about it? Okay, so then your homework for this, there's a slope fields packet. I already handed that out to you. Okay, so it's just kind of, it's way easier than trying to do book work. We used to do book work and you had to try to sketch your own and it didn't give you guidance on what points to use, so that's a lot easier to deal with. So yeah, if you have questions on it, I guess just ask.